Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the best races in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires when it comes to steamrolling the map. And the answers to this question may actually surprise you, because while there are certainly some very powerful races in the game, they're not necessarily the best suited to conquering the entire map, such as the Wood Elves, Warriors of Chaos, or Beastmen. The reason behind that is because Warriors of Chaos obviously have limitations on how many units they can recruit each turn. Beastmen have limitations in how many units they can recruit and how many armies they can have and how many heroes due to Dread. And Wood Elves, of course, can only really rely on the big trees, which creates a recruitment bottleneck. Now, don't get me wrong, someone like Orion can crank up armies like there's no tomorrow, but it can take some time. So in this video, I'm looking for races that can, from the very start of the campaign, expand very quickly, take large sections of the map, hold it, have a good economy, have good growth, casualty replenishment, and actually have good chances in auto-resolve, because that is also going to be something significant, though I am going to emphasize more on their ability to take a territory in their campaign map and also get a large number of armies. Number 3, we of course have the Vampire Counts. Any Legendary Lord of the Vampire Counts. This video is not about specific Legendary Lords, but races in general. And what the Vampire Counts have is strong economy and good unit recruitment, very quick unit recruitment. So when it comes to economy, their level 1 economic building produces 250 income, and then at level 3 you get 500 income. Many factions would love nothing more than to produce this kind of level of income. And that's just the very start. That gives you, however, a significant economic boost in more ways than one. Not just because the level 1 structure, the Gibbet, produces 250 income, but also because you're not spending money. It's not as expensive as the structures of some other races, and also you're not spending money on a tier 2 upgrade, though obviously that does have its own downsides. Now, that's only part of it. Then we have to talk about unit recruitment. The Vampire Counts by default have limited recruitment slots and lack global recruitment capacity, but what they do have in terms of special recruitment is Raise the Dead, which more than makes up for it. So over here, this is a literally turn 3 of this campaign, and in this campaign as Gorst, I can already very quickly get almost 2 stacks of troops. No other race has the ability of recruiting as many units as quickly as these guys can in a campaign, and also maintaining very large armies from the very start. Now, Gorst does have an advantage in this respect because he can rely on his very cheap zombies, but even if you're not reliant on the zombies, it is very easy, as any Legendary Lord of the Vampire Counts, Kemmler to a lesser extent of course, but it is fairly easy to maintain very large armies very quickly and also get access to high tier units. Not just things like zombies and skeletal warriors, but things like Graveguard or even higher. And in particular, the Vampire Counts do benefit if they do fight a very large battle in a campaign, because then they can recruit some very high quality units that other factions could honestly only dream of getting access to. Now, are there downsides? Yes, there are some downsides. A lot of the weaker units have poor armor. Even Gorst zombies, they still only have 30 armor. Now, that's pretty decent, but the low armor means that they won't necessarily have the best result in auto-resolve. However, the sheer numbers that they're going to bring will certainly more than make up for it. But there's more to it as well. See, every lord, be a legendary lord or regular lord, does have access to a skill pretty quickly in their blue skill line to reduce upkeep. For most races, this kind of skill that reduces upkeep by 9% is available way over here, and never mind that the Vampire Counts can further reduce upkeep even more, or that every single one of their Legendary Lords can provide casualty replenishment. That also is a fairly significant benefit, and that's available to Legendary Lords, regular Lords, and also of course Bloodline Lords. So the Vampire Counts, enormous amount of power from very early on in a campaign, And this allows all of them to expand far more quickly than many other factions can do on the campaign map. They do have good growth through the pit, and they do also have good commandments to further help that growth. Like they have faster terror, which will give them 20% growth. And finally, they also have one significant benefit in research in that they can gain students. So students can be gained when you're leveling up a hero or lord, and they gain a skill point, and you're now researching everything. So you just pause the research, you fight the battles, whatever battles you have that turn, continue the research before the turn ends, and you get a lot of students. Now, Vampire Clans also have access to some really powerful heroes and some very powerful lords. So in a lot of ways, they're a very, very strong faction. The only downside is that individual units are not necessarily so strong, and you might end up having to fight a bunch of battles manually, but the sheer power these guys have on the campaign map is something that is unmatched. Like, Warriors of Chaos may have far better armies, but they will have those armies more limited throughout their entire campaign. Vampire Counts will have a ridiculous number of armies if you play them properly. For some legendary lords, more so than others, but all the same, regardless of who you choose to play, they're going to have an incredible amount of power in a campaign. Anyone who has played an Imperial campaign or in the area of the Empire knows how much of a nightmare it is to deal with Vlad over here, because he ends up taking 2 provinces very quickly, and he's very hard to throw out of there. Incredibly difficult to throw out of there, out of that situation. But that's not because Vlad himself is so incredibly powerful. He is, but the race he has is also incredibly potent. At number 2, we have the Dark Elves. The Dark Elves have a fairly powerful early game economy, which obviously helps them get ahead of other races when it comes to early game expansion in particular, and expansion in general. But it doesn't stop just there. They have some other fairly significant benefits. Their economy is based on slaves, and while the slaves do have quite a few downsides, specifically when it comes to public order, they do get construction cost benefits and economic benefits, and they also get these dictats in every single province, giving them either a temporary 20 control, 1,000 to treasury and to control, or 50 growth and 10% construction cost to all buildings for a temporary amount. So it is easier as the Dark Elves, playing as the Dark Elves, to get to high level settlements much faster than many other races in the game. Very few other races can compete with the absolute insane speed that the Dark Elves can set in their campaign. But then there are the armies themselves. Dark Elves, regardless of who you're playing, but especially Malice Darkblade and Lokir Fellheart, will get access to really good units early on, specifically the Black Ark Corsairs. Now, the Black Ark Corsairs have a number of benefits. They have high leadership, good melee stats, good armor. Very crucial, that armor part. The reason this is so important is units with high armor tend to do very well in auto-resolve. And if you can do well in auto-resolve, you can avoid having to fight a bunch of pointless, meaningless battles, and instead focus on the important battles in a campaign. That's one big benefit that the Dark Elves do have. And they also have rights, including the Sacrifice to Cain, which gives them a substantial amount of casualty replenishment early in their campaign. The only guy who can match that, by the way, that 20% casualty replenishment, is Grombrindle, though Grombrindle only affects his army, but it more or less can be a permanent buff that he does have access to. You don't have it as a permanent buff. It is a right that lasts a certain amount of time. So for instance here, I used it early on, and now I no longer have access to it. There's other things as well. They have replenishment in foreign territory, though they don't have encamp stance, which can be something of an issue, especially when you're dealing with terrain with attrition, because for instance here, if I enable channeling, it won't do anything against the attrition that I'm suffering because I am in the Chaos Wastes. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword. But one of the biggest benefits that the Dark Elves do have, and all of the Dark Elven Legendary Lords do have access to them, it's Black Arcs. Loki or Felheart is the best in this respect, and he is very strong as a result of it, but they all have access to Black Arcs. Now, Black Arcs have a significant number of advantages. They can get you easy access to all the hero types, like Knight Assassins, Death Hags, Sorceresses, and of course Masters. But on top of that, they give you access to all unit types pretty quickly. They do have their own growth system, and you do need to upgrade that if you want to have access to things like Black Dragons, for instance. But they do have access to all of the Dark Elven units and the Dark Elven heroes. They can also recruit lords on top of that. Now, there are some downsides with this, because the structures won't increase the capacity for heroes. You'll need to do that in your ground territories, in your regular settlements. But the fact that you can get unique recruitment in the Black Arcs is a substantial advantage, because it allows you to focus purely on the economy in your settlements and get a significant amount of economic benefits as a result of that, as opposed to having to worry about recruitment structures in your settlements. Now, there are of course some downsides with this. Dark Elves don't have access to global recruitment, because instead they have access to Black Arcs. That is the trade-off of it all, but it is a very worthy trade-off. And one significant advantage that the Dark Elves do have with the Black Arcs, beyond just unit recruitment and the buffs that each Black Arc gives you, like casualty replenishment, post-battle loot, some more slaves, income from sacking settlements, 60% for characters in Circle. That is ridiculous. And you can upgrade income from sacking settlements even further. There's one early on, Charter Piracy, plus 20%. It is ridiculous how much money the Dark Elves can get through sacking settlements. But then the Black Arcs give you even further benefits. Beyond the fact that they have unit recruitment, they also have a significant upkeep benefit. So, you can recruit an entire army and pay 50% less upkeep on it by default. And you can upgrade this even further, 52%, 55%, 60% upkeep reduction. And then, of course, there's the other, the recruitment structures themselves, which also give you a benefit of up to 6% for the units that you might be recruiting. So 6% upkeep for Harpies, War Hydra, and Carbidus units. And here's the thing, the Black Arcs themselves can attack coastal settlements. And if the settlement is a bit inland, you can just recruit a lord or have a lord following the Black Arc around on the sea. And when you want to attack inland, you just transfer the army from the Black Arc. Sure, it will cost you in terms of upkeep, for a temporary amount, but you can just transfer your army, a very powerful army, from the Black Arc to a settlement. Now, Black Arcs are going to be limited in the campaign, because you can only get them with the right, unless you're playing Loki, in which case you can get very easy access to them. But for instance, right now it's turn 16. Malice does start with the Black Arc, and now I can recruit another one. Now, this right does have a 25 turn cooldown, so that is a bit of a downside. But the upsides are very significant with Black Arcs. Loki in particular is ridiculous with this, but all of the Dark Elven Legendary Lords will benefit from it. I think the one that's most ill-suited for this is Rakarth, because his playstyle is focused on beasts, and you don't really care about those kind of units. You get Black Arc Corsairs, they're really good units, and on the Black Arc itself, you can maintain them for such a ridiculously low price. Like, you can get access. Like, look at this Black Arc. It's got Artillery, Sisters of Slaughter, Dark Shards with Shields, Bleak Swords, Black Arc Corsairs, and Black Arc Corsairs with Handbows. Those are some really powerful early game armies. Now, they're a bit more expensive than some other races might have access to, so you may have more limited armies compared to, say, the Vampire counts, but the power these armies have, well, it's not quite on the same level as an early game army under, say, Be'lakor or Archaon, but it is more powerful than the vast majority of armies that anyone can put forward in the game early in the game, and you can maintain more of these kind of armies than anyone else. These kind of high quality armies, because this kind of army can go toe to toe against any other early game army in the entire game and win handily. They can find multiple armies early on and win without too much issue. These guys are really good because they've got very high armor, good weapon strength, good armor piercing, so they're scalable units even for the late game. Actually, in general, the Dark Elves do have good armor piercing, even their tier 1 Dread Spears that they can recruit from any settlement. So yeah, Dark Elves, certainly a race that can steamroll the campaign map very, very quickly. I mean, look at this campaign. I've taken over 3 entire provinces so far, and I've beaten Sigvald in a fight. Sure, I took significant casualties, and I'm not going to be able to take his fortress right here, but I have defeated Sigvald in a straight-up fight in this particular campaign pretty early on. And that's not something many other races can say, and the road to the west is open. And anyone who's fought Dark Elves will tell you just how much of a pain in the neck they can be to face on legendary difficulty. I mean, Morathi in Warhammer 2 was infamous for the fact that you would conquer vast chunks of Ulthuan and maybe never lose in Ulthuan. Maybe completely take over the island, or at the very least put up an enormously powerful fight against Tyrion and Alariel. Ulthuan's in some trouble right now in Warhammer 3 between Nakari, Noctilus, and of course Morathi, if she shows up there. Sometimes she doesn't because she gets stuck in other wars. But either way, the Dark Elves, very powerful race, very good expansionists. The one downside, believe it or not, the one downside is this. You can earn so much money from sacking that you might feel, oh, I can afford another army at this point. When in reality, you may not be able to. And that's one of the pitfalls of playing a Dark Elf. But outside of that, they are certainly a race that will reward aggression. They will reward players that are expansionists, and they will work very well with them particular mindset, especially if you get Black Arcs. And finally, and number 1, it is of course the Greenskins in Total War Warhammer 3 to allow you to steamroll the campaign map. Just to give you guys an idea, this is turn 22. I've got 5 armies, not all of them full stacks, sure, but I've got 4 full stacks of troops over here, pretty decent troops as well, and I have a 5th stack over there that I am certainly going to upgrade and get more units for it over here in this particular campaign. And I am playing as Grimgor. The Greenskins are ridiculous in terms of their steamroll potential. The reason they're so ridiculous is, yes, they don't have things like Raise the Dead or Black Arcs, but they have incredible recruitment capacity, because every settlement building will increase their local recruitment capacity by 1. So in every single one of your territories, you can be able to recruit a lot of units very, very quickly. On top of that, Greenskins have incredible growth. They have a structure that at level 1, the Idols, gives you 20 growth. Then they have a commandment that gives you 20 growth on top of that. Then they have the WA meter, which gives you 30 growth. You do the math on that, 70 growth. Pretty much by default, because your role is going to fill up this WA meter very, very quickly. On top of that, they have incredibly good control, one of the issues that the Dark Elves can certainly struggle with. So the commandment gives them 2 control, the WA meter gives them 5, so that's 7. Then you've got the no complaining plus 3. Yes, the Greenskins have such a ridiculously high level of growth. And then, of course, they have the boss tent, which they use to recruit the Goblin Big Boss, that gives them 4 control province-wide. That is absurd. The Greenskins are just an absurd race in terms of their sheer potential. Like, just maintaining this number of armies, and these are not the cheapest units I can afford. These are trolls and nasty skulkers and the like, and heroes, shamans, hero recruitment, all that. These are armies that each of them are at the 3,000 or more cost. They are absurd. They can't trade, but they get an incredible amount of money from looting and sacking settlements. The way they do that is through a combination of research, for instance, that no one fighting, 5% income from post-battle loot. That's just one example, though. There's many others. Examples. Upkeep benefits for their goblin units, and then ancillaries that help increase post-battle loot by a lot. So for instance, there's an ancillary you can put on your lords and on your heroes. That'll give you 10% income from sacking settlements. And then there's Swindler, 7% income from post-battle loot. You will be getting a ridiculous amount of them. Hell, you can even sell them and make some money from that, because you will just be rolling in these things. And you also have a pretty decent chance of getting items as well. You have a good hero selection, a good lord selection, a good selection of legendary lords that many of them buff the faction even further. I mean, Grimgor is actually one of the weaker ones, at least early on. He's stronger later on. He does have that campaign movement range, but he's actually a bit weaker early on because he's focused on late game units, the Black Orcs in particular, which are late game units. But late game, Grimgor is insanely powerful. But compare that to, say, Grom or Azag or Wurzag, a lot of power for all of the Greenskin legendary lords. And the units they have, yes, they're not Blackheart Corsairs, but they're kind of like the discount version of Blackheart Corsairs. Okay, so from every settlement at level 1, they can recruit Goblin Archers. Now, these are pretty decent range units. They have poor leadership, but they do have a decent amount of strength. And crucially, for the purposes of steamrolling on the campaign map, they do have decent enough armor, 25 by default, which you can upgrade even further to 32. Through research. Specifically, there is a research, use them, that gives them 7 armor for all Goblin units and 5% missile strength for Goblin units. Now, Goblin units by default are fairly weak, but there's a bunch of research options early on that give them significant amount of power, like melee attack, missile strength, armor, more missile strength, physical resistance, casualty replenishment, leadership, and so on and so forth. A great deal of power available for Greenskins if you're playing them. And a biblical amount of post-battle loot and money from sacking settlements. But there's more to this. There's a lot more to this. So, Greenskins, their raiding stance, so to speak, is their encamp stance. And here's the crazy part: when it comes down to it, they don't need to pay movement range. Like, this is a race that can take a settlement, sell it to their neighbor, and then move in an encamp stance. Or they can move across the campaign map in encamp stance very, very quickly. That is ridiculous. And in encamp stance, they also have benefits to global recruitment. So, for instance, here for Grimgor, so early on, I can recruit Goblin Archers and Goblins in one turn. Grom the Paunch gets a global recruitment benefit for all his Goblin units right off the bat. So he'd be able to not just recruit Goblin Archers, he'd be able to recruit the entire arsenal of units, Night Goblins, Nasty Skulkers, very, very quickly. Speaking of Nasty Skulkers, they're one of the best early game units in the game. That's because they're cheap. First off, let's discuss this. I'll need to recruit a lord to demonstrate this. They're cheap to recruit. Ridiculously cheap to recruit. 450 resource cheap. That is insanely ridiculous. And they can go toe-to-toe against Chaos Warriors and win. The reason they win is because, yes, their armor isn't that great, but they do have a decent amount of melee attack from the very start, let alone if you do upgrade them. So for instance, Grimgor here may have higher rank, so good amount of melee attack, melee defense, and a ridiculous amount of armor piercing. In fact, most of their damage is armor piercing damage, which means that they can go toe to toe against much higher tier units and win. What about cavalry? Can cavalry beat them? Nope, because cavalry will come up against the smoke bombs. You may not realize this from just auto-resolving battles, but these guys just demolish entire enemy armies. Like, I was playing as Grom, and I was in a battle against the Fey Enchantress, and it didn't look really good, but then I just threw the Nasty Skulkers on the enemy, and they absolutely annihilated the entire enemy army, including the heavy Bretonnian cavalry. And these guys are just absolutely insane. And that's just the start. Then you've got things like trolls. Then you have things like trolls, which, yes, they're not siege equipment, but they do have the siege attacker trait, so you can auto-resolve sieges in a single go, and trolls are available very quickly in your settlements. At tier 2, you can get regular trolls. At tier 3, you can get Death River Troll Hags, which give you casualty replenishment, and then stone trolls and river trolls. Stone trolls in particular are far better than regular trolls because they have much higher armor. They're going to be incredible combatants. Obviously, like all troll units, they do have poor leadership, but they are very, very durable units. And 70 armor early on in the game at tier 3 units is really good, and they do an incredible amount of damage in a battle as well. On top of having pretty good speed, melee attack, melee defense, so they're actually pretty hard to hit when it comes down to it. And there's more! Yes, believe it or not, the mania with the Greenskins doesn't actually stop there, and this is why they get elevated on this list to the number 1 spot. So, Greenskins can confederate other factions through diplomacy, but they can also confederate through war. So, what you can do, especially against powerful Greenskin factions, like say, look at Warzak, right? Look at his empire and all his armies, his pre-high level settlement buildings, all that. All I would need to do in this entire campaign, damn the diplomatic consequences, but all I would need to do is move through Warzak's territory, find him, and defeat him in battle. That's all I would need to do. I actually don't know where he is right now. He might have been defeated, but Skarsnik is laying siege to Dwarven capital. He's going to take it. Ah, there he is. So all I would need to do is go toe-to-toe against this army, defeat them, and then when you defeat a Greenskin Lord or Legendary Lord, you get an option immediately after to confederate with them. There are confederation penalties, of course. If we look at Azak, because he's the only one I actually have diplomatic possibilities, there are downsides. -40 diplomatic relations, that doesn't really matter too much. -4 control, sure, that is a downside. But the fact that you can just go fight a battle against the enemy faction leader, get him, even if he's just a regular lord, get him, and yeah, they'll lose the army that they had, that you just defeated, but you will be able to get control of everything else. This is exactly how I gained control of a lot of this territory here in the Darklands. And that's just one example. I mean, if you're playing Skarsnik or Warzak, you can do it against each other and get control of all of their territory for that. Of course, diplomacy is always an option, but Greenskin diplomacy basically involves beating someone with a rock and then they bend the knee. That is Greenskin diplomacy, and it is very effective. So imagine doubling the size of your empire. Like Grimgor is here, right? Let's say 20 turns to get there. But imagine doubling the size of your empire by turn 40. And then doubling it again as you confederate more and more and more lords of the Greenskins and unleash an unstoppable tide of death against your opponents. That is the steamroll effect of the Greenskins in action. It's something Norska also has available to it. It actually was created for Norska, so Norska can unify all of Norska very, very quickly, like all Wulfric would need to do in this situation, because I'm pretty sure in this campaign he's at war with Trog. All he would really need to do, or Trog, the same, they would just need to meet each other in battle, and whoever wins would confederate the loser, and then basically gain control over all of Norska, or the vast majority of Norska, and become a very powerful faction. This is something available to the Greenskins. This is something that Creative Assembly added to Greenskins as part of their rework in Warhammer 2. And that's all there is to it. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and I'll see you boys and girls next time.